Listen to a man whose message has been described by the American Banker magazine as a mental shower bath. And I believe that 30 minutes from now, you'll know why. He's the author of 4 books on marketing, one of which, Showmanship in Business, has the distinction of being the most widely reprinted business book in the English language. Since leaving the post of merchandising director of Philip Morris some years ago, he has established a highly successful practice in the field of sales counseling. His list of clients reads like a blue book of American business. He served such well-known companies as Helene Curtis, National Distillers, Time Incorporated, the National Tea Company, Sperry and Hutchinson, the Green Stamp Company, Sunbeam Bread, and Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. He has a long record of service to the profession of selling. He was for 3 years a director of the New York Sales Executives Club, also chairman of its Distinguished Salesman's Award Committee. For Sales Marketing Executives International, he was the first chairman of its high school essay contest. For 3 years, chairman of its membership committee and father of its field sales management activities. He loves to work on marketing and selling problems and has a unique gift for sharing his experiences with others. That's why companies like General Foods, Standard Oil, DuPont, International Silver, and many others have used him to help develop the selling techniques of their sales forces. He has had many fine titles in his time, but the one he enjoys best is salesman. He loves to sell and enjoys sharing his experiences with others. That's why he's cooperated with the Businessmen's Record Club in making this recorded talk available to you. Well, I don't want to take another moment of his time. Mr. Zenn Kaufman.
I don't know when I've heard an introduction that was so warm and friendly and so gracious and so complimentary and so extravagant and so optimistic, so true. It's long been my feeling that the laws of good selling and marketing are largely based on certain fundamental laws of human nature, and that while the technique of selling can be and may have to be worked out within the confines of or the framework of selling itself, the whole of this subject of selling and marketing stands on certain basics. Basics not only of business, but even many of the basic rules that govern man's conduct toward man. And it's my feeling that marketing and selling, more than ever today, need to rely on these fundamentals, even though these fundamentals crop up from year to year and time to time under different names and slogans. You know, selling used to be simple. You had the approach, you had the presentation, and you had a close. But today you can't tell the fundamentals from the labels. We have the hot button school of thinking, and we have the sizzle school of thinking, and all of these are indeed valuable in their place, but I feel that we need less sloganeering about selling and a return to these basic fundamentals, or even, as we might establish, eternal verities. Actually, anybody who has successfully mastered the principles of human relations should eventually qualify as a good salesman. And today I would like to present to you a few of these people and a few of these principles, and see if we don't find that there have been many good salesmen who never even knew they were salesmen, who never considered themselves as salesmen. They never received any sales awards. They never won the trip at the end of the contest. They never spoke at sales meetings. However, as we examine them, I think you may find that it would be your feeling that they would enhance the value of the staff of any good sales manager. Now, my group of masters today includes such improbable people as Plato and Willie Sutton, and Harpo Marx and Lord Disraeli, and Newt Rockney and Zsa Zsa Gabor. Indeed, strange bedfellows. If I may use the word bedfellows in its broadest sense. Now, here and there a touch of humor may appear in our thinking, but it's what I would call kidding on the square. Under it, I'm serious, very serious. But this is just a method of treatment that I have endorsed vigorously in its place, the use of humor, and as a matter of fact, one of my friends has nominated Mark Twain for our master's group for his wonderful remark that humor is the good-natured side of truth. For our first master, we go back in time several thousand years to the days of a classic struggle between Rome and Carthage. As you remember reading in your history books, a master salesman appeared on the scene at that time, a great orator by the name of Marcus Cato. And using the favorite selling medium of his day, the human voice, Mr. Cato toured his territory making speeches against Carthage. And he always closed with the same phrase, Carthage delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. And through good days and bad, whether he got an order or not, he stuck to this one selling appeal until, as you know, he finally made the sale. Now, salesmen who jump from theme to theme could well consider the way that Mr. Cato stayed with his one sales talk until he hit his quota. And with advertisers, too, fortunes are lost by advertisers who think the public is tired of their story when, in truth, it's barely beginning to sink in. On this subject of repetition, let's not forget Albert Lasker, the great founder of Lord and Thomas. His answer to a client who thought his advertising schedule brought him too much duplication. Said, Mr. Lasker, don't worry about the people who see your ad twice. The fellow you got to worry about is the one who doesn't see it at all. Our second master, we moved down through time some thousands of years to Harpo Marx. And we put him in the master's group for his reply when someone asked him why he liked to look at pictures. And his answer is, I like to see what I read. Now, customers, too, like to see what a salesman is talking about. And that's why it's so important to use visuals in the telling of a selling story. Good visuals hold a prospect's attention. They make a story more convincing. They help to keep your story remembered. Our next master was nominated by a Chicagoan. Some of you may know. We invite nominations to this little Hall of Fame of marketing of ours, and this one comes from Bob Quain, who is a vice president of sales of the Hilton Hotels. He writes, a man who belongs in your series is Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, who in one of his more serious moods wrote a book called The Complete English Tradesman. And in it he said, let not the apprentice run your shop. The customer likes to hear the master's voice. Let not the apprentice run your shop. Customer likes to hear the master's voice. Now, I'd say that few people are better qualified than Bob Quain to make this observation, because from watching him myself in his own growth from a salesman in the Roosevelt Hotel in New York to sales manager and then general manager of the Conrad Hilton in Chicago and now vice president for sales of the whole chain, he owes much of his success to his faithful observance of this precept of Defoe's. He was never too big or too busy to keep in touch with his guests, with his customers. Frequently, he was always looking, always listening. And another thing about this great guy is that he treats his employees like customers. And he's always visiting with them on the job, and he's always listening to them. And on this subject of employee relations, there's a story told recently about a plant manager who was standing in his plant watching this busy factory hum along, and to his horror, he saw an employee get his sleeve caught in a big machine and get picked up by the machine and whirled around and around, and this manager was transfixed with fright, but finally broke loose and turned to a control panel and cut off the power, and the guy dropped to the ground, a limp mass, and he rushed over to him, and he picked him up, and he said, Joe, speak to me, speak to me. Joe opened one eye and looks up at him, and he says, speak to you? I just passed you 17 times, and you didn't even say hello. On this subject of customer relations, we turn to another master, and a man who was widely respected for his ability to inspire other people. He lived in the world of sports, but shortly before his untimely death, he was hired by one of the great automotive companies to put some excitement into their dealer relations program. His name, as you might guess, was Rockne. Newt Rockne, the coach of the famous Notre Dame football team of what is sometimes rightly called the golden age of sports. Great gift for inspiring. In fact, they say that Rockne once gave the team such a terrific lacing between the halves that the lockers went out and played football. But today I want to deal with another and more serious aspect of Rockne's talent, and it concerns his reply when he was asked once for the reason for the success of one of his great teams. And he said this: we're four deep in every position. We're four deep in every position. Now, this is a point that every salesman could well heed. To fortify himself with contacts in depth in every account that you're working in. To vigorously cultivate the understudy to Mr. Big, who's signing that order for you today, and all of the coterie of people around him that can influence that sale. Not just the boss, but everybody. Otherwise, there can come a new king who knows not Joseph. And as you know from the book, history records that this is just what happened to Joseph. Many could emulate that nameless genius who, making a first call on a store, would always say to the first innocent-looking clerk or employee that he saw, "Are you the owner?" He knew damn well that he was making a mistake, but he also knew that he was making a friend.
Please turn this record to side 2 to meet the rest of Mr. Kaufman's star-studded cast of Masters of Marketing.
The only trouble was that he frequently called on them in the evening after they were closed. He was a great believer in the visual selling techniques recommended by our other master, Mr. Harpo Marx. In fact, he had a visual sales kit in which he had so much confidence that he sometimes had two of them, one in each hand. But he had so much faith in this visual presentation that he had boiled his sales talk down to just 2 words. They tell a story of a time when Sutton went into a bank. He was working daytimes this week and put on his presentation, and everybody was sold. And he hit his quota. In any event, Willie finally got caught. And when they finally put the handcuffs on him and they hauled him away, one of the reporters asked him, "Willie, how come you only held up banks?" And his answer was a gem, and in my opinion qualifies him for our Masters group when he said, "'Cause that's where the money is." Now, salesmen who dissipate their selling on fringe prospects would do well to consider Willie's philosophy. Most of us fall into a habit pattern, and we work in the way we use our time. We work from the same old lists and the same old way. And it's important to study the shifting sands of the economy and find out where the money really is. On the other hand, it's important not to be too hasty in deciding who won't buy or who can't buy. This is a mistake I find myself making too often. And I mentioned this bad trait in myself to my friend Hal Tiffany when he was sales manager of the Research Institute. He says, you know, you're absolutely right. He said, we all do it too often. He said, I had an example a few weeks ago. I went to see work with a man in Albany, one of our men, and I was going to work on Monday. I went up Sunday night, and we went out and took a walk together in the evening. We walked down toward the river, and my man said, I've got a prospect down here, got a lead in the mail, and got a date with him tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And why don't we take a look at the building? So they walked down. They turned out to be a real dump, a ramshackle, torn down old place. And Hal turns to the salesman and says, listen, forget it. This is an NG lead. Skip it. The salesman said, okay. Then Hal said, the minute I said it, I realized what a stupid thing it was to say. I turned to the salesman, and here I thought, face, I was just testing you to see what you do. We're going to call on that man. Well, they sold him. They got a nice order from him. And I don't know about you, but I'd just be interested, just for a show of hands, if you're brave enough to do it. Do you find yourself sometimes deciding ahead of time who won't buy? If you've done that, raise your hand. Let's just see how many people are like me. Yeah. I have had some Lulus. I remember giving a talk for a group here in New York, and as I frequently do, I'll offer something if you give me your card. I do that to get leads. And after the meeting, people came up. There was Black & Decker and General Electric and RCA, and one fella gave me he had no card. He had written it on a piece of paper. And as I folded these all together, it didn't fit, and it got kind of awkward, and I was going to just throw it away. You know, no card, no money, no nothing. But some divine instinct prevailed, and I kept it, and I sent him the material along with the others. Hal, do you think I ever heard from General Electric? No. Did I hear from Black & Decker? Did I hear from RCA? I heard from the other guy. He bought. And I think we have to watch ourselves. Otherwise, we make this mistake. Another writer that I want to put in the Masters group is Damon Runyon, a great reporter and well known for his short stories. And in a letter to his son, Runyon said, part of newspaper greatness is getting along in and with an office. You would be surprised how much of my reputation comes from the mob inside always being eager to give me the best of it. Incidentally, my son gave me that. He had read some notes on this master's talk. He's a freshman in college, and he passed this little thing along to me. And this is very important. Everybody in your organization can be of help to any salesman, whether it's somebody in a shipping or delivering department or a bookkeeping department, the boss's secretary, everybody. And when the chips are down and something goes wrong, which has got to happen sooner or later, then it's particularly important to have everybody with you. Another nomination for the series has come from my friend Jack Keelty, who is president of Keelty, Deckert & Hampy, a Chicago sales management consulting firm and a good competitor of mine. Jack writes, if Senior Masters series in the magazines, and you say nominations are welcome, here's one I've used. It's the title of a song made popular by Bert Williams, a well-known vaudeville singer at the turn of the century, and it qualifies Williams for the Masters. The title was, Everybody Wants to Go to Heaven, but Nobody Wants to Die. And this is a very interesting thought. And Jack goes on to tell about a salesman who said to him that he was one of the luckiest guys in the world, and then added, "It's a funny thing, you know, the harder I work, the luckier I get." Jack tells, too, about a salesman who he once asked, "How long you've been working for the company?" And the reply was, "Well, I've been with them 11 years, but I've been working for them ever since they threatened to fire me." But on this key point of Bert Williams, everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. An observation was made that came to me in the form of a telegram that was once sent to me by my friend Charlie Zimmerman, a great, a one-time insurance salesman who rose to be first a general agent and then a vice president in charge of sales of the Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company, and today is president of that company. And once when I was scheduled to talk to an insurance group, I wired Charlie, Charlie, what is the one thing that the poor salesman doesn't do that hurts him most? And his reply, which shot back by wire, was a gem. He said, anything that he should do that he doesn't like to do. And I don't have to look further than myself for proof of this trait in human nature, because we find it so easy to omit that part of a standard working job that we enjoy the least. And it's dangerous. And there was an incident that befell me when I went to work for the Calvert Distillers Corporation just before I was with Philip Morris, and Bill Wachtel, the president, had a luncheon party for me at the Waldorf to meet some of their top executives. And at the luncheon, it being Friday, they served fish, and it was striped bass. And Wachtel says, "I don't like striped bass." And Josh Gowan, who was my immediate senior there, said to him, "Well, just eat between the stripes." Well, you know, Gowan is no longer with the Calvert Distillers. But don't worry about him, because he became president of another company. And the fact is that Gowan was right. And frequently in our work, we have to learn to do a lot of things that we don't like to do, but they must be done. Now, here's the master you've been waiting for, and that is Zsa Zsa Gabor. And she made our group when she said, husbands are like fires. They go out when unattended. And I'm sure we all accept that statement as basically true, because she knows whereof she speaks. But most of us here, too, know that this philosophy also applies to the handling of customers, that customers have to be nursed almost like a lover. And on this, I recall a wonderful sign that Bill Holler, when head of sales for Chevrolet Motor, sent out to all the Chevrolet dealers to put on the wall, and it said, never forget a customer, never let a customer forget you. And it is important to nurse customers, and it's probably a fact that your present customers probably represent your best prospect list. And what's more, it's further important to keep them tuned up to the point where they are so sold on the medium that they will say a good word to others. Our Masters group wouldn't be complete without some touch of British nobility, and for this we turn to Alfred Lord Disraeli, who once said, let us take our jobs seriously, but never ourselves. And as an example, when the late Tom Beck was referred to in the phrase, the president and the employees of the Kroll Publishing Company, he corrected it and said, make that the president and the other employees of the Kroll Publishing Company, adding that he felt that he was just as much an employee as anyone else who worked there. Self-praise can be just as out of place in a selling or an advertising campaign. And Kenneth Gould, my co-author, put it with doubtful grammar but with great style when he wrote in Showmanship and Business, don't tell people how good you make your goods, tell them how good your goods makes them. You know, they tell a story about Al Smith, who, when he retired as governor, wrote his memoirs, and all of the syndicates were bidding to get these memoirs, to publish them, and he gave them to the McNaught Syndicate, and at a price that was lower than some of the other syndicates offered. And his friend said to him, "How come, Al, you did this?" And he said, "Well, all these other fellas came to me and told me how good they were. But McNaught, he came to me and he told me how good I was. So I gave him the book." And in our selling, this is something eternally to keep in mind. The fierce stigmatism that overcomes our prospect when it comes to viewing himself. And I guess it was Oscar Wilde, and maybe we should put him into the masters for this great line in one of his plays. The average man falls in love with himself at a very young age, and it's usually the beginning of a lifelong romance. And this is true. Let us do nothing to tamper with that lovely self-affection, because from it comes the mood to spend money. Now, I have saved for last the master who I think was really responsible for leading my thinking into the area that my remarks cover here today. And incidentally, if you have some other masters to recommend to us, please send them along. We have a little desk sign that I first had made just for my own desk, and then I made a few more to send to some of the folks we admire, and it just reads, "Selling Spoken Here." And I'd like to send you one if you can give me a master. But I put this man last, not because he is greatest, but because one thing he said hit the nail right on the head for the subject I'm dealing with. That man is another famous Englishman. His name is Robert Louis Stevenson. And we all know him best as the author of Treasure Island, which we read as children, and The Child's Garden of Verses, which was read to us as children. And the man whose writing is characterized by that great simplicity that is the mark of true greatness. Stevenson once said, "Each man lives by selling something." And this is true. Rockney sold victory for Notre Dame. Disraeli sold the British Empire, and Cato sold Rome. Sutton sold only money, and he's in jail. And that's an object lesson. Zsa Gabor, well, she sells Zaja. But each person lives by selling something. You see, salesmen do well what most people would like to do and can't. Let me repeat that. Salesmen do well what most people would like to do and can't. And I think this is one reason why some people have a tendency to criticize salesmen, even the good salesmen, because in part, really, they are jealous. But the salesman stands as a great motivator and a great key force in our economy. And I want to point out what I think is one of the great myths of American business, namely the time-worn phrase that production made America great. I reject that. I say selling made production great. And that's what happened. Well, that winds up our gallery of masters for today, and in no sense have I tried to provide a capsule course in selling, but rather to provide a few benchmarks that can serve us in our daily travel on the trail to sales. At the same time, reaching outside of our everyday work and outside of the commonplace of our daily routine. I may have succeeded in making my views provocative enough to sink in and stay in. Most important, I hope I can impart to you a bit of my own philosophy on selling, namely that the outside look is important, and that selling, while a craft in itself, cannot pull itself up by its own bootstraps, but really should tap all the aid it can from the wisdom of those people of all times and in all fields who by their own success have qualified as masters in a large sense, that they have won the influence and interest and attendance and the affection of millions of people. Because selling looks through all of life. It's a life-wide business. Actually, all of the people we have quoted were experts at living in human relations. And human relations is really the word we're dealing with, and all of our masters were experts in that subject. And this is the business of selling. Thank you very much for inviting me.